It all starts with a single question asked to an anonymous caller. What do you think happens when we die? And from there, the conversation goes in completely unexpected directions. Some speak with certainty, others with doubt. Some are still trying to make sense of it all. I'm Zach Ansell, and this is When We Die Talks, a podcast about death, meaning, and how that shapes the way we live. This podcast was born from my own fears around death and the need to talk about it. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I'm glad you're here. Today's episode is brought to you by Amori. How was your first Christmas without your mom? How was your wedding day without your dad? If you know the pain of losing someone you deeply loved, Amori is for you. Amori is a digital time capsule that helps you reflect on mortality, navigate emotions, and create heartfelt messages for your children, so you can feel prepared and let your presence be felt through life's many moments, even when you're no longer here. Let your words become a source of strength and comfort for those you leave behind. Tomorrow isn't promised, but your love can be. Download your mortality companion today at amori.life. That's AMORI.life, and use the code WhenWeDie50 for 50% off. Hey, and welcome back or welcome here if this is your first time. This is kind of a landmark episode for a few reasons. The most obvious, and you've probably already noticed from the title, this is episode 30. Honestly, there were moments earlier this year, around episodes 10 through 12, when I wasn't sure I'd keep going. I hit a point where it just didn't feel like it was working, and I started to judge myself, wondering if this whole thing was a crazy idea. I'm so grateful I pushed through, because now we've reached something I'm really proud of. This also is the first time the project has crossed international borders. Our caller today is from Canada, and it feels like a huge step forward for this little project. I hope this is just the beginning of many more conversations from around the world that I get to bring to you. And one more milestone. This is essentially the last episode of the podcast's first year. October 2nd, 2024 was when I released episode 1. Just me talking to a mic, completely unsure of what I was doing. But really, this project began almost a year earlier in November 2023 with the simple voicemail line. So this marks a season of multiple full circle moments. But today's call is about much more than milestones. It's a conversation that moves between science, spirituality, and something that came up again and again. Culture. We talk about how different cultures approach death, from indigenous traditions to Western medicine, and how those perspectives shape our experiences with and views on death. What the brain might be doing in our final moments, whether our minds could spin whole new realities, and what it means to return to nature and the cosmos when we die. At the heart of all of this is one beautiful idea, that each of us is a universe in and of ourselves. I hope you enjoy.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, going well. Are you good to go as well?
We are good to go. I don't know what
Gorgeous.
happened, but the only thing that I'll say is a good thing is I sat here and I checked your phone number 4 times. I don't know why I'm anxious because this is international, although we're not that far apart, but I just was kind of stressing about it. And I was what happens if this somehow connects to an American phone number? That's the exact same number. Why would that even happen? But in my brain, I'm stressing out. And then we obviously had our moment where it didn't connect, but then I at least knew that I was talking to the right person. And so I could just call a random person, and if they're friendly enough, maybe they end up just talking the whole time. So
exactly. No, for sure. Otherwise, you call them and you're like, hey, what happens when you die? And they're just like, why? Who are you?
Maybe it'd be a really good publicity, marketing stunt for the project.
I mean, there we go. Everything's networking.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I'm glad that we're able to connect. We'll kind of get into this in a second, but you're the first international caller for the project, which is very exciting. But I do feel like I kind of shit on Western culture a lot. And
there's a lot to shit on about it.
Totally. And in some ways, I'm almost I kind of think this whole Western culture and Eastern culture thing is also a really weird divisive thing that we use, that very strange way that we divide. But ultimately, because it's my experience, it's American culture. And so I kind of shit on how, we look at death and look at life and all these things. And so that was when I put out this new push to try to get some people from other places. I'm super excited. But the first thing I normally ask is, why did you even want to do a call about death?
Oh, why did I want to do a call about death? I think what I found really interesting about it is, as a culture, we really do shy away from death. It's not something that I've personally really been exposed to outside of a few very personal times, which I think for most people, especially in Western culture in North America, I think that's sort of the thing. We don't talk about death. We really just don't talk about it. And if we do,
Totally.
I think there's always a religious undertone. So I was just so interested to just have an open, candid conversation about death because it's something we don't talk about. And I think that the more we talk about these things, our perspectives change, our minds change. And we learn more and we realize how connected we are because the two things that are true is that we are born and we die. And that is a truism across everything. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting concept. I'm a zapper by nature, so I was excited by the prospect of getting to talk about this and discuss death and what happens after death, really kind of with no stakes, but also just to see where the conversation goes.
Awesome. That was such a great answer. Like, I felt like initially you were like, ooh, I was not expecting this question. And then it felt like you had that written down. Very impressive.
Thank you. In case you were wondering, I fully prepared for this. I spent the entire week. No, I'm joking.
That's probably what I would do is I'd be like, what am I going to say? I'm going to be stressing out. And that's obviously not what I'm trying to do with this project. So I'm excited for our conversation. Now we'll even backtrack a little bit. So maybe you can just give us an idea of roughly where you're calling from and then your favorite book and why.
Ooh, okay. So just generally, I'm the first international caller, and I'm so excited to be able to start this new milestone in your project. I'm not too far as I'm Canadian, so we're close neighbors. So I'm in the East Coast. I feel like I'm a bit of a West Coast girly at heart, but okay. I love Toronto. I love the city. I think it's very diverse and vibrant. I think you meet people from every walk of life here, and honestly, I'm biased, but one of the greatest cities in the world. So awesome. That's kind of where I'm situated. And so that's sort of the context and background that I'm in. And my favorite book, I love to read, so it's really difficult to pinpoint one.
Totally.
I'm going to go with the book that came most instinctively to me, so not thinking too much about it or else I'll never pick one. But it's called Mostly Happy by Pam Buston. And I read this book over a decade ago. I think I read it while I was in elementary, middle school, not quite in high school yet.
Okay.
And as far as books go, it followed the protagonist's journey over a few years. It was a bit of a deep, heavy book, and I don't remember details. Actually, me being like, why did I go with this book? But what I remember really liking about it is the main character, she had this suitcase and she would fill it with things, and it was just a very moving, poignant, real story. So I really enjoyed that. It stayed with me up until now because you asked me my favorite book, and I'm Mostly Happy by Pam Buston, and I haven't thought about that in the last 12 years, probably.
Maybe it's a reminder to read it again now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely should read it. It really stuck with me for a really long time. But if I'm allowed to give a backup answer, if I'm not, I'll finish the book. Okay, perfect. And then I will wrap this up because I know this is off topic. But this is a book I read more recently. I read it within the last year, and it's called Speak by Louisa. She's an American novelist and poet. I picked it up randomly, knew nothing about it, and it is written. It's not written chronologically. You're basically following. There's 5 different stories. One's in the future. One's in the 1700s. Exactly. And they're all tied together by technology. It's really interesting. I think especially in today's climate, as we see AI and robots becoming more integrated into our lives, it's really about that and what ends up happening in the dystopia. And I'm not going to give spoilers, but I thought it was very beautifully written. There was a lot of poetic prose. I enjoyed that there were different perspectives and different stories, and the way it all wove together. Incredible.
It sounds fantastic. And yeah, looking forward to checking it out.
For sure. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, now we can kind of get into the big question where we just kind of kick this whole thing off and see where this conversation goes. What do you think happens when we die?
Well, I think in terms of personhood, at the most individual level, I think that we are gone. We are dead. And without going into, beliefs of life after death and reincarnation, spirituality, heaven, hell, all of that, I think me as a person, I was about to say my name, but me as a person, once I'm dead, I am gone. And I think that's true for most people in terms of identity. That living being person is gone because they're dead. And then at that point, we return back to oneness with nature and the universe. And I mean that quite literally, as in our body decomposes, we are all made of matter and cannot be created or destroyed. And the way I sort of think of it, it's like a ripple in an ocean. And we are that ripple, and then once we die, the waves go away and we are part of that ocean again. So I think that's what's happening. And that's just, there's so many tangents to go off of, but if I was to just give like a clean little answer, we die as we are and we return back to nature and the cosmos.
Well, the fun thing is we're going to go off on a lot of those tangents. And so I do have a follow-up question, but I'm almost more interested in hearing where you were naturally going to go next.
So in terms of, going back to nature, our body's gone decomposed. That's the physical aspect. Now, there's a lot of question about energy and like, quote unquote, the soul. And it has been, it's been documented many times academically and just like, subjectively as well, where there is either a lightness, like weight loss from the body, or people sense like even after the brain dies, there's activity, or like even after like you're pronounced that there's activity. And as we know, the brain really is everything, our existence, our reality. It starts within the brain. And so with that, I think while physically we are dying and the people, if we're around people, you're watching someone die, I think what's actually going on inside the brain is different because, studies, MRIs, all of that has shown how during death and near-death experiences and all of that, basically the brain, brain activity is actually firing off, like it's firing everywhere. All parts of the brain, various parts of the brain are activated. It's not just like other organs where like slowly, it keeps like tapering off or it flatlines. That's not what's happening. Our brain there's so much going on and our brain has the power to shape our reality and our perspective. So I think that's where I'm sort of like, okay, what hallucinations, what's going on inside the brain as you die and how does that carry over? Is that just a way for us as animals to cope with death? Because death is something that like, especially as conscious beings, as humans, it kind of breaks our reality a little bit thinking about it. Yeah. And now I'm not a very religious person. I consider myself spiritual, but I consider myself very objective as well. So I think to cope with death and meaning and to give ourselves a purpose, we come up with all of these stories and narratives about what happens after death. So essentially, our physical body's gone, but within our brain, there's all of this activity. And I read this anecdotal story of a man who was in a coma. He was in a car accident, and then he went into a coma for, I want to say it was about a week. Don't quote me on this, but not a very long period of time.
Yeah.
Definitely not a month, maybe like 10 days, right? When he came out of the coma, he shared how he actually had lived a decade.
Whoa.
Over the course of these few days. He got married, he had children, he watched his children grow. And then one day how he kind of came out of the coma is he was in his home, quote unquote home, while he was in the coma, and he was staring at a lamp. And as he stared at this lamp, it was disfigured and it started changing. And then suddenly he wakes up and he's in the hospital bed. And so stories like that really put things into perspective where a few days felt like decades. And he went through like a grieving process and after he came out because he had formed genuine attachments to the people in this other, I'm going to use the term reality, while he was in this coma. And everyone kind of, it was assumed that he would pass away and all of that, but he came back. So
that's wild.
It is. So I'm thinking while we're dying, am I just going to live an entire different lifetime? Because that's a possibility because we don't know what's going on inside the brain.
I mean, we could be in a coma right now. We could be living that alternate reality, and we have loved ones that are waiting for us to wake up. That's wild to think about.
Seriously. It is really wild because, and they describe their life so vividly. I mean, after I read that story, I stared at like inanimate objects in my house, like, to be like, are you changing? Yeah. But it is really interesting because if our brain is everything and there's this, and we're bringing concepts of like energy cannot be created and destroyed and all of that, there's so much that we don't know.
It's interesting because, I mean, I think your background and my background are similar in the sense of like, I've always kind of believed nothing happens, it's over. But I do feel like I hear stories like that, or like just doing stuff and like learning about consciousness and reality and all this stuff. Yeah, how do you actually know that this is real? You know, and of course that can go into the whole simulation theory. And so I think that's what's so fun to talk about with all of this. And so I am curious a little bit because we do have similar theories, although you speak about death, but it doesn't sound like you have a lot of fear around it, which is intriguing to me. But then it also does feel like early on you mentioned something about reincarnation, this story about the coma patient. In some ways too, it does feel like you have this very clear thought of nothing happens. And again, that's my language, not your language. But then you also, it does sound like you're open to some mystery, that the world is weird and works in weird ways. And maybe you're kind of on a similar search. I don't know what the question was in there, but maybe something in there sparked something for you.
I have a few responses. I have a few responses just as you were speaking.
Yeah.
I think in terms of one thing you mentioned, kind of going chronologically as you spoke, I think just as a mortal being, it's wired, everyone's wired to have some fear and anxiety about death.
Yeah.
With that being said, I think going into everyone's background and perspective shapes them. But I think just to be very vulnerable for a moment, I think I grew up with a lot of mental illness. But I grew up with a lot of, depression and anxiety. And I think what comes along with that is not always, and I'm absolutely only speaking for myself, is there were a lot of thoughts of death I had from a very young age. I think I remember the first time, I remember being 4, thinking about death. You know what I mean? So I feel like I sort of got all the fears out of the way, but not actually. I think death is always something where I was like, I will die. Sometimes I was like, I want to die. Now I don't. And I'm very grateful. Life is beautiful. But I think in terms of the way I think about it, death is inevitable. And I know that. Yeah. And so why would I be afraid of something that I know is happening? I don't fear death in the sense that I know that it will be the ending of this cycle of this life. And once I'm dead, like I said, I am gone. So what am I worrying about, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess I really don't fear death in that way. But in terms of me thinking that, I just said, once we're gone, it's sort of nothingness, to use your word. We also don't know. And I think we're at a time where there's a lot we do know about the world and a lot of advances we have made. But I think it's a bit ignorant to think, and maybe that's not the right word, to think that we know. I know what happens after death. We just die, or there's a heaven, or there's a hell, or there's reincarnation. I think not knowing what happens after death, at least at this point in time where we are as a species in humanity, I think that will change. We will continue to learn. And in the meantime, I think what you're doing is so important and also exciting because you shared how through this process, your perspective has shifted as you've, discussed and learned and thought about it more. So I think that will happen. I mean, I think there is nothingness, but also when people share their beliefs after death, I respect that. If they think they are going somewhere, I speak to them as if that is already true. Yeah. So whether that's reincarnation or an afterlife, I'll be like, yeah, you're probably right. Because the thing is, I don't know. Yeah. And because I don't know, I'm only limiting myself by closing off these different, branches.
I was gonna say it's kind of ridiculous to speak with absolute certainty, and I get that that's part of maybe some faith, but I don't know, I think speaking with absolute certainty that about something that is unknowable, that just gets you into a place of where a lot of the world is now, right? Where it just, if you're not willing to change your opinion on things, that just kind of backs you into a corner.
It really does. And when we speak of reincarnation and sometimes despite me thinking that death is, I am no longer there, exploring these other concepts of, okay, people speak about enlightenment. And enlightenment is something people either achieve within their life or they believe, we're reincarnated again and again until we reach so-called enlightenment. But in order to think of death like that. I think a lot of concepts of what happens after death are complicated. And I think in terms of speaking about faith, I think a lot of the aspects of religion, I'm not talking about what people make religion to benefit themselves, but what religion kind of actually is. And like, if we really read what things are saying, God is nature. Yeah. And nature is God. And we are part of nature.
Yeah, we are animals. We forget that. We are animals.
Yeah, we really are. We really, really are. And we're part of ecosystems. And we're not, like, my life is not just my own. My life is connected to the well-being of life around me. And I'm not even speaking about humans. I'm talking about the grass, the trees, a bug. Like, would you kill a bug you saw, or would you let it live? Sort of a thing. We are part of these ecosystems, or nature is God, and we're so individualized now. And this speaks to Western society, I think, a bit more, because our culture is much more, it's individualistic instead of collective, which other Eastern cultures have. We see ourselves as the entire world, and we are a universe.
Which is hard not to some extent, right? Like, that is our experience, we have our experience. So it's hard not to, but it's obviously not true.
No, of
We're
course.
Not the only ones.
And the thing is, like, the thing of nature and existence is everything that happens at the micro also happens at the macro. And there are a lot of parallels. You know, I'm not sure if you've seen sort of on social media, like the veins and like tree roots or like the cosmos and a pupil. And I think those having images like that, it's so interesting beautiful. Because we see ourselves as this individual universe, but we are part of the greater body and the greater collective. But within us, there's also our organs, which break down into tissues, which break down into cells. And I hope that's the right scientific. I hope that's factual.
Well, the great thing is, if you're wrong, and I'm not saying that you're not going to get yelled at. I'll get yelled at. So you're good. You're in the clear.
Exactly. So I think going back to death, when we die, our bodies break down, go back to nature. We become one with the plants and we become one with the soil. And I think if there is a soul, if there is a spirit, and I'm not saying there isn't, and I'm not saying there is, because truly I don't know. But whether there is or is not an existence, I think that also goes back to some sort of collective, to some sort of, to this world that we live in.
I, again, have so many notes. And so I think I'm going to try to like bring it all together, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But I think as humans, just in general, I don't necessarily know the number off the top of my head, but I assume a really large portion of the world's population lives in cities. They're very dense, and we're not actually part of nature, a good majority of people. And so I don't necessarily think that science is necessarily pushing an agenda of like, oh, the only science we're researching or doing is, and this sounds ridiculous to say because it is ridiculous, like city-based. But I do think there's some of this stuff that we're disconnected from the source, and I think that's the source in my mind is what you're calling God and nature. You know, we're disconnected from this thing. And I do feel like there is some magic in nature, and just like how you feel different when you go sit in the forest, or, you know, you go listen to the ocean. It changes you. And I do think there's science around how it chemically changes you, but it's like, that's what we can measure. So is there stuff in there that we can't measure? And yeah, I don't know if I'm really I think I am getting really far off track of the death conversation, but death and life are one and the same. But
1,000%.
I don't know. I do think there's something beautiful about the magic in this world that it feels like we're actually getting disconnected from. And it is hard because I would say I'm very skeptical. I want it to be proven. I want facts. I want figures. And the world we live in, facts and figures are getting even more confusing, and what's real and what's not real. And maybe that'll bring us back to a place where it's like intuition. Maybe we'll get back to a place of intuition. Maybe that'll be the great outcome of all the chaos that's going on in the world.
Absolutely. Like you said how, like, you know, sitting in a forest or listening to the waves, it makes us feel more connected. And yeah, like science, like studies have shown that seeing the color green elicits like calmness in the body. And I'll go into this a bit more as well, but going into culture, because we did start our call, you know, talking about this a little bit. So I'm trying to think how far back to go with all this, because science, obviously it is great. I mean, I'm a scientist. That is my job. So I love science.
So what I just said, take it all back. I take it all back. Science is the best. It's great. Just kidding.
No, I'm just saying, like,
totally,
so I definitely, like, science is great. It has progressed us. However, it's not, as with everything in this world, it's complicated because science is colonial.
Yeah.
Especially in North America, I'm going to stay within our Western context. Science wants you to be so objective and so fact-based that anything outside of that very like imperial, like outside of that, it's not accepted, and it's seen as pseudoscience. It's seen as like more nature-based medicines, ways of living, ways of thinking. Just through our history and our centuries of colonization, it's been integrated and stitched into our culture that those are, don't deserve as much precedence. All of that has now, I feel like it's kind of bottlenecking into where we currently are, because if we also look at, just thinking of indigenous cultures, their ways of living are very, very nature-based and collective-based.
Yeah.
And with that, they don't shy away from death either. And obviously, this is a grand generalization, but like, they have very specific death rituals, ceremonies. Like, death was as celebrated as life is, because it's one and the same.
Yeah.
Life and death are, you can't have one without the other. So I think I'm also, I'm South Asian. So, but I've grown up in a very Western culture. So sort of living in between those two and trying to find a balance of what resonates, what is the truest to me within both of these cultures. I've had to learn to open my mind up a lot more to non-Western culture and be like, wait a second, there is validity in what's saying, even though it goes against everything I've been taught.
Yeah.
Growing up here.
Duality.
It is an interesting duality. And I think just when you make things like science is so objective and clinical, that even in death here, like working with palliative patients with head and neck cancer, all of that, a really big thing that's missing with end of life care is sort of connection and compassion.
Yeah.
Because everything is done so clinically, so objectively, so scientifically. And again, I love science, so I'm not taking away from that, but it really is so integrated into our culture in that way that we don't honor death, we don't value death. We are individual as we are. We're seen as our own universes. And the culture reflects that. We live thinking about our day to day because you need to work, you need to like drive, you need to commute 2 hours. You don't have time to like sit in the forest.
Yeah.
And if you do, amazing. Like I really, everyone should have time to connect with nature. Exactly. Like that is the world we should live in, but it's not. So I think with that, people then, I think, with the society and the way that we live and the reality of our lives, clutching to narratives about a heaven after life, or, your soul reincarnating, or, meeting up with your soul family, or whatever you think it is, it's coping as well, where you're like, okay, at least after I die, all my hard work, all this XYZ, like I will be going to heaven. I will, I get to be a frog on a tree. So I think that's also how we cope.
Yeah. Because it's scary. Death is scary.
Question,
so I don't want to like shit on religion or anything like that, but there is coping around that of like, I really hope that I do end up in heaven or that I become reincarnated. And I think part of that is just ego and identity and self. It's like, I want to have mattered. I want to have meant something, my existence to have meant something. And I think that's something I think about. And it's from the scientific standpoint on both sides of it. Okay, well, if you look at Earth, you've got what I think 8 billion people. I just saw something that was like, I think it was like 108 or 110 billion people have died on Earth. And so it's like, okay, so I'm just say 1 in 100 billion. That's a lot. And not saying that necessarily that there is life on other planets, but space is really big. And so it's like, we are so insignificant. And so it's really hard for me to believe that I matter, but then also using that exact same logic to say, well, wait, hold on. I am this one person in this one time. There is something special about that. And there is some magic about that. And so maybe I do matter. And like I don't mean that in a very, I don't want that to sound dark, right? Like that I don't matter, but like just in the sense of like 1 in 100 billion is a pretty small number. I have those thoughts and those kind of dualities, I guess, where it's like I can go down the same train of logic and end up at the complete opposite results, having the same kind of steps to get there.
It is important. And I think you talking about how we want our life to matter, like, and whether it's ego and whatever it is, we want our lives to mean something and we want our death to mean something. But like you said, over 100 billion people have died. And I think this comes down to culture, the collective, sorry, not to like beat a dead horse, but like culture and collective where
they're important.
I think, like shifting conversations and thoughts about death of not just, okay, I am one person and when I die, I'm gone and that's it. And I don't matter and my life doesn't matter, because realistically, after your grandkids, no one's going to remember you. People will forget you. Your life and death really, like, honestly, in the history of the world, don't matter that much. But I use that same thought process and that logic to be like, damn, okay, I only have my one life. I only have this life. And I want to do something. I want to do things that and obviously it's so much easier said than done, but I want to live a kind of life where every single thing I do, the ripples of it continue. And I don't want it to be associated with me. I don't need it to be.
Yeah, you don't need the recognition.
No, you don't, because like I am one person, like there will be millions of others with my name probably,
Yeah.
But if I can do something, and even it doesn't even have to be something big. I'm not talking about leaving a legacy like Shakespeare or Marie Curie. I literally just mean like, if I can spend 20 extra minutes talking to someone and I don't even know it, but they're like, hey, I actually didn't kill myself because I talked to someone. I think, and my perspectives will continue to change, but I think I'm at a point where I'm comfortable with my own death because I'm learning to accept, and I've accepted to a certain extent, that life and existence and humanity goes so far beyond me. Yeah. And that's not to say I'm insignificant, because I can do so much to contribute to that, even if it's directly within the 3 people around me. Yeah. Our perspectives, everything, like these sorts of things, it makes me think of death is inevitable. It will happen, but I have all this life to live, and I am a universe in and of myself, as is everyone. So how can we all connect? And just, I know we're nearing the end of our time, but I really just briefly wanted to touch on this, because we've spoken about the collective so much. And I really, just because we are a part of nature and ecosystems and everything, we cannot be healthy if there are parts of us within this collective that aren't healthy. Like if the food we eat, if the animals are miserable and there's pesticides and blah, 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 and there's microplastics and everything, that definitely affects our lives. So I think right now there's a lot going on in the world. We're watching multiple genocides happen. Death is more prevalent in all society. And because like you mentioned with social media, with technology, we're more connected now through that. So we're able to see things. We're able to really see death in a way that like, and maybe this is my own privilege of my life, like we're seeing death so brutal and so dehumanizing. And so there is so much death everywhere. And that changes people, and it should change you. And I think it's very human to see so much death all around the world, everywhere, and want to do something about it, and I'm not saying we save everyone, but I think we are at a time in society, and it's not politics, it's just us as human beings, where we're exposed to a lot of cruelty and we see death in large masses. We are hearing of hundreds of thousands of people being exterminated. And this isn't the first time in history that this has happened. This has happened many times. Yeah. But we're uniquely in a position where it's happening during our lifetime, and it's happening in a way that we are firsthand witnesses exposed to all this death. Yeah. Yes, we're exposed to the death of people, to the death of ecosystems, to the death of international law. No, there's a lot of things, you know, and I'm not going to go more specifically into it. But I think what's really helped me personally cope and understand death and deal with what happens after death and what happens leading up to death, which is life. I think for me, the more rooted I am in doing things for my community, for the collective, things outside of myself, the more real I feel, and the more I feel like I live. And I think that also helps with the very natural thought processes of, oh my God, do I matter? I will die. What do I do?
Yeah, I think you wrapped it up really beautifully, because you actually hit on one of the things that I was going to ask you as we were kind of, going towards the finish line of the call or whatever. But I think one of the things, and I feel like I have to say this in such a gentle way because I don't want it to be misconstrued, because it's not like I want to say to like ignore all the stuff that's going on in the world, right? Like there's a lot of stuff happening. Like you said, I don't even need to re-say it. There's all this anger and outrage. And I think one of the things that a lot of people get caught up in is in the outrage. And then they also get tired because of the news cycle, because all you're hearing about is anger and frustration and hate and all this stuff. And it's what you said right before kind of all this, the 3 people closest to me. I want to help them. I think that's one of the biggest things that we can all do right now is work with the people around us, the community around us. And I don't know, maybe that's me becoming like a little bit of a hippie or something. I don't know. But like, I do feel like if we can just start taking care of the people around us, that can grow into something more and more. And so it's like you can really actually tap into your community and help the people around you by volunteering locally. And I do believe that can grow into something really beautiful, or at least I hope it can. But yeah.
I mean, we talked about how we, as a culture and society, we kind of shy away from death.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons, you started this podcast. And I think we're also at a time, like with social media and just everything everywhere, where we're exposed to so much death and we're seeing so much of it. So the worry for me then lays is I hope we don't continue to view death as like when you hear about thousands of people dying, it's dehumanizing. In and of itself, it's dehumanizing. And we kind of spoke about how, in all cultures, there are rituals we do associated with death, even if we don't think about death. We shy away from it. But, you'll have a funeral, you'll have a burial, you'll have a headstone. So I hope as we move forward, as we care more about each other and community and the collective, we also view death as something that we shy away from, and that we hear about people dying and we're like, okay, that's just a number, and we don't want to think about it. But we think, okay, what does this actually mean? What does this mean if people like this are allowed to be killed? And what does it mean if we're not allowed to talk about X, Y, Z? And kind of how the goal of existence is to progress and be better. How does all of that tie together? And I don't have the answers to that. I think that could be a whole other hour.
The world might be a better place.
If they did, oh my God, making president of the world. No, I'm joking.
That sounds like a terrible job.
I know it does sound like a terrible job. I personally do not ever want to be in politics. Just not for me. So not president of the world, but
Well, thank you so much for doing this. It was such a wonderful conversation. I loved that you were the first international caller. You said so many amazing things. I think maybe my favorite thing that you said is XYZ. I don't know why I love that. Like us Americans, we say XYZ. But when I hear Z, it just sounds, and my name's Zach, so I have a Z in my name, and it's like, or a Z in my name. And it just makes me feel like maybe a little bit cooler. But no, on a serious note, I do think we have very similar thoughts, and it's always interesting to talk to another person who is on the same level. But I think talking about death, it just reminds me all the time that it's like, hey, you're going to die. This is important. What you're doing today. It just feels like for me overall, it just makes me more present. So
absolutely.
I'm glad we did this.
And thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm sure basically every person you've spoken to for this is probably the longest they've spoken about death and thought about death. It is for me, intentionally thinking and speaking about it. For sure. So I think this is so important. And also in terms of me being the first international caller, I know we sort of joked about how we're neighbors. But I think because we have some similar viewpoints and all of that, we really aren't culturally, Canada and America, we're close neighbors and the cultures are very closely intertwined.
Totally.
So we're and I think that's true for most people and cultures, you realize we're all always so much more alike, and we have so much more grounds in common than we would think. I mean, and I love that, you picked up on the Z. That's something I never even think about. But yeah, it's those sorts of differences where like the Z versus the Z. But, when it comes down to it, I think we're not that different.
And maybe that's my like secret agenda with this project too, is it's like, we're all going to die no matter what you believe politically, no matter what you believe religiously, no matter what you believe. Yeah. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Everybody's going to die. And we can have conversations across generations and across religions and across political spectrum. And we can have conversations and they can be good. And we realize that, like you said, we're all a lot more alike than we think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to make this super quick, but, talking about us all being alike, I'm actually reading Brave New World.
Oh, nice.
I'm not sure whether you've read it.
I have.
I feel like I'm late to the game, but it's really good. I'm enjoying it a lot, but there was a passage in it I read recently where basically it was the person, Henry Ford, he said something like, bioecologically, all people, like all humans are the same. And the context for that is, they're ranked, alphas, beta, delta, epsilon. And so Lenina, the other protagonist, was kind of inquiring, how come a delta or an epsilon? Like, how come alphas don't produce more flowers or more greenery after they die? And then, the response is because, biochemically, we're all the same. So I think really it does come down to that. After we die, we are all the same anyways. Yeah. And so all these differences we have while we're alive, majority of it will not matter once we're dead.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. So thank you so much for doing this. And yeah, we'll definitely have to stay in touch.
Thank you. Yeah. This has been amazing. Absolutely. Would love to. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Take care.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was our very first international call, and I love that it happened right as the podcast is closing out its first year. It feels like a reminder that these conversations really do stretch beyond age, borders, political beliefs, and that death is something connecting all of us, no matter where we live. Next week's episode will be a little bit different. It's just me again, looking back on the first year of the project, and I'm not sure what else, but I hope you'll tune in. And then the following week, I'm really excited to share a call with someone who's had a near-death experience and opens up about something most of us will never get to encounter. Well, at least maybe not until the very end. Thanks for listening to this episode of When We Die Talks. These conversations don't offer answers, but they do open space. Space to reflect, to feel less alone, and maybe to see things a little differently than before. If you'd like to explore your own beliefs out loud, you can apply to be an anonymous caller at whenwedietalks.com. If a full call feels like too much, the voicemail is always open. Leave a message at 971-328-0864 and share what you believe happens when we die. Listener support makes this podcast possible. You can now join with a premium subscription for early access to episodes, or with a monthly contribution. Either way, your support helps me keep sharing these stories. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, please like, share, and follow. Anything helps. Until next time, have a good life.
Okay, stop. You could become a bird, or you could be dug up in a stone. Dug up in a cemetery stone.
Oh, wait, so you could become a bird, or you could get dug up in a cemetery stone?
Yeah.
Okay. What else do you think happens when people or animals die?
I don't know.
It could be a little bit of a mystery?
Yeah.
But I remember recently you were telling me that you wanted to be a bird, right?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share about what happens when people die?
I don't know.
No? Okay.
And can I leave the message for a different day if I have any more thoughts?
If you have more thoughts, yeah, you can leave more thoughts on another message.
Well, you said
Thank you so much for collecting our thoughts on this very important subject.